All these reactionary rugger-bugger politicians scrambling over each other, trying to score political points from the tragedy that was last Friday's London Bridge terror attack. They're all talking about their approach to the prison system, and not a single person affected by the incident or imprisonment was invited to discuss, so here I am to interject. My name's Carl Catamol, and I actually witnessed what happened. And like the victims of the attack, I'm a prison campaigner, and my writing has been published by Penguin. And in fact, Jack Merritt, who's one of the deceased, followed my work on social media. And like the assailant, I'm an ex-prisoner, and I was failed by prison. Anyway, there's so much more than meets the eye than when it comes to this case, so let me explain what I saw and what's what. I passed the north side of London Bridge, and a big lump of a policeman frantically ordered me through a construction site doorway, shouting, "Bomb threat! Move!" with a big stick above his head. I stood watching the situation unfurl from a second floor window with a crew of bewildered builders in high vis. Armed police ping past Monument, screech to a halt, clamber over pre-existing anti-terrorism barricades in place from the previous attack in 2017, then moved to a scrum of people holding down a man, and it was hard to tell what was going on, but when I heard doof, 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 I knew it was the sound of silenced machine gun shots. Suits, ties and pencil skirt pandemonium. Office workers spread from the area like confetti, screaming and streaming as fast as stilettos and loafers allow. Meanwhile, the builders next to me irreverently suggested we get the kettle on. They were like, yeah, we're gonna be here for a while. A trillion more police turn up, stuffed in vans, cars and 4x4s, riding horses, bikes and mopeds, and 2 minutes later, we'd all been ordered to evacuate too. Beyond the cordon, I sit down in a doorway next to a group of city boys who begin to impine, "We need to burn them on a pyre!" I stood up and asked them, who do you mean, them? And I sat back down and I thought to myself, oh my God, here we go. It is happening again. 4 generic responses. Frontline services run towards the disaster. The builders take it in their stride. Office workers run in absolute panic. And posh boys sit safely on the sidelines getting warmed up for political football. In both physical and philosophical terms, minutes after the event, and with no details, we were already rushing towards polarisation. So a concerned friend phoned me and asked if I'm okay, and I kind of hate that like mark me safe stuff. And anyway, she didn't know I was there, so I was like, yeah, I'm all right. How come? Anyway, she explained what has now become common knowledge, but at that point wasn't known by the media. It was that the incident had begun at a Cambridge University criminology event, and as I'm an ex-prisoner who had recently been invited to give a talk at Cambridge, she figured I might have been present, which I wasn't. It was only by coincidence that I'd been a stone's throw away from the event. These basic narratives rapidly became a lot more complex as more info was imparted. There's a lot more to unpack. Let's have a go. So the assailant is now known to be Usman Khan, and he was locked up as part of a jihadi plot in 2012, and immediately news outlets seem to be asking that simple yet very loaded question: why was he released? Well, here's why. Parole boards don't refer to a crystal ball to see what's going to happen in the future. They refer to solid evidence like case files about his conduct in prison and arriving at a decision that will tell them whether the prisoner presents a substantive risk if they were to be released. And Khan had, according to reports, been a model prisoner. And not only that, but he'd actively attempted to leave his extremism behind, seeking to become, as stated in a letter penned from his prison cell, a good British citizen. However, his requests for help had fallen on overstretched ears, which doesn't surprise me in the slightest. It's a well-established pattern behind bars. Prisoners aren't helped even when they're a captive audience. Drug users desperate to get clean can't access treatment courses. Illiterate prisoners keen to learn basic literacy skills rely on charities with wavering funding. Underclass prisoners who've made a misguided attempt at escaping poverty are released poorer than ever and often homeless. Those suffering from trauma, veterans and victims of childhood abuse alike, are rarely given the support they so desperately need, and mentally ill prisoners are locked up more than 23 hours a day in segregation units. Prison doesn't disappear social problems. It temporarily disappears people to a place that magnifies their detriments. You see, if you're vulnerable, you'll be further victimised. And if you're hard as nails, then that concrete environment that's so devoid of positive emotions will further cement you. And beyond prison, I assume Khan's experience of probation would be similar to mine and everyone else I've known who's been through the service. It's been stripped of resources, stripped further, and then privatised, which was and continues to be an unmitigated disaster. Serious crimes committed on parole increased by 50% since privatisation, and it's not hard to see why. They usher you in, ask very basic questions, tick a box, kick you out the door. A functional probation service costs time and money, and these days the service has neither. Ideological offenders need a lot of both. And it's evident, for every penny pinched, the human toll is the price we end up paying. While those affected can generally be swept under the carpet, left in doorways or under bridges, or locked up again and again, back in a cell. This particular example just happens to be very newsworthy. Ros Morrison, who's a probation worker with 20 years experience or something, and she's now an academic, told me that the culture has changed irreparably. She said they used to have proper time to dedicate to those in their care, and now they're often unable to even read the basics of their case. My friend who was recently released from prison after 30 years, when the probation officer turned up to their parole hearing, they didn't even know that it was 30, they thought it was 13. So historically and presently, there's no way for the Tories to frame the above in their favour. They will need to use lies and media manipulation. Within hours, Boris had done exactly that. He'd used the incident to bolster his desire to incarcerate people in worse conditions for longer periods. And despite the father of the first named victim, that's Jack Merritt, saying his son would not want his death to be used for these cynical means, the Prime Minister and his death penalty supporting cabinet member Priti Patel turned up on the scene to panel beat the tragedy into their own political prerogative. He proceeded to wheel out the trites. Dangerous criminals need longer sentences. Listen, if you... Bloody hell. Yeah, it sounds like my neighbour's cats are going to get done for GBH. If you don't tackle the root causes of crime or fail to help people even when they reach out for it, try and help them rehabilitate themselves, it does not matter if you lock people up for 1 year, 10 years or 40. And you know what else they're trying to do? They're trying to now blame Jeremy Corbyn for a David Blunkett piece of policy from the mid-2000s of automatically releasing people halfway through their sentence. That's something that I was actually subject to. And without this policy, we'd see even higher rates of imprisonment in this country. And bear in mind, we already have the highest imprisonment per capita rate in Western Europe. Basically, they're just using this all to continue their previous desires, which are tougher sentencing, keep people in longer, build privatised American-style mega jails, which some states in the USA are even closing. So prison obsession is a massively expensive and proven failed endeavour. And now Boris is talking about minimum 14 years for terrorism. Long sentences are no deterrent, and I suspect they're the least of your worries when, like Khan, you're willing to die for your ideology. Stating the obvious, those with murderous instinct are psychopathic. But to me, what's also obvious, but often overlooked, is that politicians and their media goons who form and reinforce systems with such lack of understanding of basic human behaviours, systems that reliably produce further harm, that's a display of psychopathy, systematic psychopathy. The next trite that he wheeled out was British values and we won't be cowed. Boris is always trying to do this thing where he sounds like Churchill, and it's a bit like Cacophonics trying to sound like Celine Dion. Not that I'm a fan of Churchill or Celine Dion. Given that he's desperate for American-style dysfunctional mass incarceration, he should at least leave British identity out of it. Americanisation, dressed in a Union Jack. His justice vision is commensurate with his Brexit plans. Do you know what I'm saying? Another trite he wheeled out was, it's what the public will want to see. And I've got to respect him for that one. That was, it's what the public will want to see. And I've got to respect him for that one. He's saying it as it is. He's stating that his populist policy craft isn't for the reduction of offending rates. It isn't for the taxpayer. It's not heeding facts. It's exclusively shaped for reactionary tabloid editors. On that note, it's worth mentioning the Sun headline that appeared the day after the attack. It was something like, London Bridge hero is convicted murderer on day release. Honestly, I've never seen a headline like it, and the duality of, you know, if you can do something bad, then you can also do something good, predictably sent the low IQ Twitter sphere of bored blokes into moral freefall, which on a surface level is embarrassing, but on a deeper level it reveals a hierarchy of ill-informed judgments that have more than a hint of underlying racism. Murderer defeats terrorist, you know what I'm saying? It's like fox defeats rat, scum to hero in 10 seconds flat. Next day, he's not a hero. And then you got people saying, he should have never been released from prison. Oh, what? The hero was on day release from prison, and another of the heroes was an ex-prisoner who now works at a legitimate charity. It's really not that confusing unless you are really that basic, but there we go. Beyond the destruction derby of online moral mudslingmanship, I don't know if that's a word, but whatever, you know what I mean, the human cost is really actual. I mean, it's deeply sad that Usman Khan was sucked back into extremism. It's sadder still that his victims lost their lives and are now being used by conservatives as collateral for exactly what they stood against. Can I just say that Jack's master's thesis was entitled A Critical Analysis of the Overrepresentation of BAME Males aged 18 to 21 in the Prison System. Work out if he would vouch for what Boris and Pretty are on. Exponentially sadder still is the fact that this poisonous but very digestible narrative of prison solves social issues will be further pushed by the millionaire-owned media, and that will be at the detriment of virtually everyone except themselves. I mean, the evident complexity of this issue favours a metered discussion, but has and will still be used to bolster mistruths and misnomers. As I already said, there is no way this issue can sit in conservative favour. It's agonisingly predictable, but predictably agonising. Newspapers will let conservatives escape justice, then label those who argue from a rational standpoint as unpatriotic sissies or something. The last thing I want to do is just say RIP to Saskia and Jack, who were the people who were killed, and get well soon to the other victims of the attack.